Welcome to another episode of the Simply Trade News Roundup. Hi, Lalo. Hi, Andy. How are you guys today?
Good morning.
Good morning. Doing good. Thank you.
So the first article we're going to go into is kind of a story that talks about the designation of the Houthis as a terrorist group and what kind of impact it has on Yemen and the regional stability. So I guess it did raise a certain concern for people, what kind of stability this would bring, or like regional stability, and especially with Yemen. So I kind of want to go into detail what this means, like the designation of them being a terrorist group, and if it has any, if it does any difference, you know, like, I mean, we knew before that they're not good, but is there a difference now?
We talked about it last week or the week before, and it's just pretty much, y'all be careful when you're going through there, because now that they're considered a terrorist group, which they were anyway, but now it's official. That doesn't take away from the fact that you still have to be careful shipping through there. Mostly everyone now is going around the Horn of Africa, taking a lot longer. So it's just disrupting supply chains and making things miserable. Again, I'm not saying anything new from last week. It's still all the same stuff. So really, that's all I had on just reminding people the trade aspect of it. So.
Well, and to our listeners, this article is from Swiss Info and is an article done by Jonathan Stahl, Simon Lewis, and Megan Davies. And they've done a good job with this. Here's the thing. Under the Trump administration, the Houthis were listed as a terrorist organization. And when the Biden administration came in, they took them off of that. And so for the last, 3 years, I guess, they have had non-terrorist activities, and what that means. So being put back on the terrorist group, what does that mean? It means that the Houthi group there in Yemen and the people in Yemen and all are considered, obviously terrorists. What that means also is you cannot do business with them. They are on the restricted parties listing, and any group, party, or individual that is in support of the Houthis now is not to be, you're not to do business with them. So stop and think, for the last 3 years, they've had an economic uptick, if you will, of being able to get information, get equipment or whatever. And, one of the things that they have been able to get in the last couple of years are drones. Or equipment to generate or manufacture drones. But so that's one of the things that's happened, that the Houthis, that's what they're doing. They're using drones to strike at commercial vehicles and whatnot. And the U.S. military has been pushing back on some of that finally. But all that to say is that what's happened is the Houthi group has now flexing their muscles as a terrorist group. They're making attacks and trying to literally pirate ships, and they've been successful on a couple of them.
Yeah, I saw some of those videos. Those videos are crazy. Like those videos, I've seen them because it's funny. Like we all want to say that TikTok's not a good app or whatever. But it is, because all these crazy things that are happening in the trade industry, you see it on TikTok, and you see the actual videos like of pirates attacking these ships, and it's crazy. Like I was like out of my mind. I was like, this is not real. And it's real.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing, is that unfortunately due to the in their maritime laws in international waters and whatnot, ships can only have limited capabilities in defending their ship. So if you see them, they're trying to fight these pirates off with water cannons because they don't have ammunitions and guns and things of that nature. And yet the pirates, that's what they're using.
There's also this one thing that they use. They use this, it's like a spiky thing, I guess, that they twist around the entire boat. Like the workers have to do it, like which is, I think it's just, I mean, crazy that they have to deal with it, right? Because they're just trying to do their job. And here we are getting, it's kind of scary. Like I'm surprised people are still doing their job,
Well, and the net effect here is that the Houthis have basically effectively disrupted trade in that region, whether it is to and from Yemen or around Yemen and transiting around there. So what's happening is it's, that area there is similar to the Panama Canal cutting from the Pacific over to the Atlantic, is that they're able to cut through and from the northern part of the Mediterranean down in through and cut around, and they don't have to go all the way around Africa. Well, guess what? Now they do. And as a result, transportation cost going to the other side over there off the other side of Indian Ocean and whatnot is astronomically going up. You've got to burn more fuel to go around the horn there of Africa. It takes a lot more time because of the transit time. So all said and done is that as far as the Houthis making these attacks on things, they're also negatively affecting the economy of the Middle Eastern countries there. And so, all of this to say, being put back and listed officially as a terrorist group means that economically, as well as from a security perspective and all that, there's several things that will happen now, but it's going to take a little bit of time for all that to take effect. That, you know what, U.S. companies, Western companies, in Canada and North America and in the Western world, in Europe and all, you need to be looking and updating your restricted parties list, and or your vendors need to. So that's an action. That's a takeaway on this, that you need to make sure it's up to date and re-vet, if you will, any of your customers that are from that region, because they now may be on that list. And if you do business with them, you're going to really get hit hard with potential fines and penalties and even potential criminal action.
I mean, it's just wild that this can't be somehow stopped, right?
It's a shame, and they're trying to justify it as claiming that they're in solidarity with the Palestinians. But, again, nobody seems to want to look to see what the Palestinians have actually done themselves. It's back and forth. It's like cherry picking, out of all the news reports of what's going on.
To more ambitious things, no pun intended, because we're talking about an ambitious EU trade policy. Germany's DIHK calls for, which is, I guess, the one that handles like international trade, international like business. Calls for ambitious EU trade policy and more agreements. So ultimately, what the president, Peter Adrian, said, he told Reuters, the current geopolitical challenges urgently require a reorientation of international trade policy. I feel like we also talk about this in the US efforts. We've been talking about this. So I guess this is kind of the European side. And I don't want to, I mean, I know we can talk about Europe, but I kind of want to put it together with the US. And I want to ask if the same efforts that they are making, are we doing that in the United States too? Is this kind of the same effort, or what's the difference?
Well, it would be a case where, all right, first off, DIHK, that is the German Chamber of Commerce. Okay. So it's not the government. What the German Chamber of Commerce, which is representative of business, basically, is looking to, what's the word I'm looking for here? They're recommending that Germany, as well as Europe, under the European Union, take efforts to develop trade agreements with other countries to stimulate international trade. And that's what that effort is. Yes, the U.S. does that. Unfortunately, so far, the Biden administration has not had any trade agreements. They've tried to modify current ones and whatnot, and that we've talked about that. In this particular case, it is a positive where Germany is pushing, which obviously Germany is, if not the largest, one of the largest economies in Europe, and is pushing, the Chamber of Commerce there is pushing to see more trade agreements on behalf of Europe with other countries to stimulate trade. So that, from an economic stimulation perspective, what happens when you have more international trade? And again, from a fair perspective on the trade is to generate jobs, generate revenues, and hopefully make it a win-win situation where buying and selling and whatnot. So,
it is actually the biggest economy. But how? So, like, we see this forward move, right? Which what is what we're kind of also wanting to expect from the U.S. I'm not going to talk about like I guess it is a little political. I don't want to go into the government, but what can people that work in trade, that need these kind of efforts? Because obviously it benefits not only the country, it benefits like the businesses, like going, it's like a pyramid kind of. What can the people do? Like, are there any petitions, or is there something, is there someone that can talk to, make that happen or bring that out so something can move forward?
Annick, that is a very good question. I'm glad you asked that. The issue there, the only entity that can negotiate a trade agreement is a government. So in this case, not only the government of Germany, what the chamber is saying is that the European Union's government needs to engage in negotiations with other countries to literally develop and negotiate a trade agreement with other countries. And so to that extent, the average citizen, people like yourself, your young folks, you need to look who your elected officials are. So this is purely my recommendation or suggestion, if you will, is that look to see from a German government perspective, your elected officials that have oversight of the agencies of the government that would engage in, like, maybe the Department of Commerce. In the U.S., it would be the Department of Commerce, it would be the State Department, and those kinds of things. But that your elected officials that have committees oversight, look to them, talk to them, see what's going on and what can be done from a German perspective to influence the European Union. Second, look to see what departments and or representatives of the European Union that would do the same thing, and also at the same time reach out to not only your German government officials, but reach out to the European Union officials and just send emails or make a phone call or two and just say, what about negotiating an agreement with XYZ company or country, and try and look at stimulating trade both ways, especially between the Europe and the U.S. There ought to be.
Why I was asking.
Yeah, sorry, there ought to be a trade agreement with EU and the U.S. And there's been bits and pieces here and there, but there's not been a collective agreement right now.
That's why I was asking, because I see those efforts on the European side, but I was saying where are the efforts in the U.S. side? Like kind of bringing this to the U.S., like making these efforts to initiate
and
more.
And on the U.S. side, Annick, is that same thing. Is we need to be looking at the House of Representatives and the Senate. What committees have oversight of international trade, and push them to negotiate something with Europe so that we can get out of this constant battle back and forth of little things here and there. Aerospace, there was a big issue for decades and it's still going on, and it's predominantly between Boeing and Airbus and vice versa. And then you have secondary commodities, as we've talked about, where the U.S. has levied the 232 tariffs, which is on aluminum and steel products. Europe has been irritated about that, and so they were going to counter with tariffs on jeans, if you will, Harley Davidsons, motorcycles, and whiskeys and all that. So, it's like, hey, if we can get an agreement between, the U.S. and Europe, that's one, or North America, where you have the, the NAFTA 2.0 with Canada, U.S., and Mexico collectively having an trade agreement with Europe, so that it's not just one country, it's the three countries dealing with Europe and vice versa. That would be phenomenal. So,
well, I guess something that's also been coming up a lot last year was China, and finally we got an article on China. Doesn't have anything to do with the US really, though. It says that China is looking to boost EU imports, which is kind of funny, I would think. We kind of talked about this before the podcast, that China is changing up their ways a little bit. So let's talk about that. What do you think this initiation is kind of telling us for what China is wanting to do this year or to move forward? Because it seems like they're, building these kind of bonds to stay. I mean, they always want to stay on top of everyone. So what do you think?
well, I will say this is, and again, we shifted for our listeners. We have shifted to a third article here. So it was Germany was chamber was wanting to say, hey, Europe, European Union get trade agreements. Well, now China specifically is wanting to deal with Europe. And what I found more than ever, it's like, okay, yeah, China's trying to again stimulate trade with Europe. In this particular article, this article was done by Alyssa Chen. What is it? China
South
Diplomacy?
China Morning Post.
Oh,
So
okay.
it is
South China
yeah.
Morning Post. Okay. But basically, they're talking about, where China has been complaining about the U.S. and Europe and others that have put restrictions on commodities, in particular, advanced chips. Microchips that could be used in artificial intelligence and things of that nature. So in this is that China is changing tactics here a little bit rather than just doing complaining or lodging complaints. They're now trying to put a big fat carrot out there to say, hey, Europe, we want to stimulate more trade. So, China is the second largest economy in the world. And they are trying to say they will open up their markets, their economy to more European trade, provided, though, with the caveat that Europe will pull back on the restrictions of advanced technologies, case in point of the chips. So they're trying to say, let's stimulate trade, let's get into a trade deal. But now to do that, you got China is wanting to get their hands on these advanced chips and advanced technology. And so it's interesting in that. So we'll see what happens in it. So in this particular case, I salute China. It's a very shrewd tactic. I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. So, folks, China's not really your friend. China is looking at world global dominance. And they're getting there slowly but surely. They're not stopping. But this is just a tactic in it. And to their credit, I mean, this may work. It may open up the European markets to China again, as well as European products to China. So if it works, we'll see what happens. But again, that restriction on that technological electronics and chips and things of that nature, that it puts Europe in a situation where are they going to stay in unison on this particular restriction, or are they going to go against the U.S. and others to allow that? So be interesting.
Yeah, that actually is interesting. I'm gonna have to research a little bit on that because I don't know what the particular issue is with China. I know that well, I always, Russia and the EU. I mean, it's a little bit tricky. I feel like it's like a really
China's doing business not only with Russia but also with Iran. Okay.
yeah. So well, that I see Germany's in a real. I mean, the EU itself is in a kind of tricky situation right now. I feel like.
Well, and they've allowed themselves to get there, and so that,
Yeah,
again, that just makes it a little difficult because Germany is their main supplier of fuel is coming from Russia.
yeah, it's really bad because I mean, no, actually, Germany is trying to find new ways. I don't know. I saw something in the news, but I know that last winter it was so bad that they didn't allow or I don't know what they were scared that they didn't have any heat here because of that issue, and I was like, "There's no way." Because as us individuals, we don't feel it until something really happens. And once that scare was, you're just like, what's going on? So that's why it's kind of important to stay up to date with these kind of news, because otherwise, I mean, you'd have no idea, and then tomorrow you have no heat. What are you going to do? You have to kind of prepare.
Well,
Yeah.
and again, that was one of the things that building independence, if you will, energy independence and things of that nature. Again, this is where Germany right now, this is part of the scenarios, whether you want to talk about it or, or like it or not, the issue that came back was the very thing where NATO was put into force. Why? To protect it from Russia and the old Soviet Union, as well as now Russia. And yet Germany is subsidizing Russia's economy with billions of dollars for Russia to supply, the natural gas, the liquid natural gas, to run your heating and cooling and all that kind of stuff and whatever. And so the issue there again is that Germany is saying, hey, Russia, you shouldn't be invading the Ukraine, but here's a lot of money here to, you should do, better than that. And that's what they're doing. It's kind of like the little chihuahua on the front porch yapping at you, but they still want to be fed. So,
Yeah, I think it was kind of a wake up call. So I don't know. They've been definitely trying to make efforts. I mean, you have to, what are you going to do? There's nothing literally you can do, especially when it comes to a country like Russia.
Well, it's you find a different supplier. I mean, that was one of the things that towards the end of the Trump administration, Trump had negotiated with the European Union, the president of the European Union at the time, that the U.S. could be that supplier of liquid natural gas. And I mean, the U.S. had plenty of it. And unfortunately now, things have changed and, all that got cut off. And now the U.S., instead of being energy independent, which we were in a matter of just a few years, we're now importing oil and things of that nature to, supply our own, economy, which is unfortunate because we've got plenty of fuel. It's just that it's been cut off here. So that has now rendered Germany and other countries that you're dependent on your enemy.
I mean, we know that international trade is important. Trading is important, and resource trading and stuff is still important because it benefits other countries that you're allies with or whatever. But I get it. It's a tricky thing because, when you have someone like Russia, there's really no end to it and you have to get away. But anyways, I just wanted to say this is a quick little thing that I researched. So we talked about the US, China, and Germany, and looking at the numbers, like the GDP, so USA is at 26 billion, while China is at 19 billion, which is not that much of a difference. And China is coming for USA's neck. And then Germany is down there at 4.3 billion. Okay, we're so tiny. So we fit into Texas like twice. So, okay, that makes sense, right? Anyways, that's really it for today. So we had more European stuff today, which that's what kind of was in the news. So if that's something that doesn't interest you, then maybe try next time because the news changed, right? Things, yeah. So, but it's good to be, to understand what's going on across the world. I think it helps us understand what's going on with our country and just having a bigger picture. And other than that, I hope you have a great week. And it's almost January is almost coming to an end, so make it a good one. Anyways, thank you guys.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.